So let's start with color perception, and from there, hopefully, segue into the free will versus determinism stuff. There is something in regards to color perception called metamerism, which is where we have two light reflecting surfaces which reflect different wavelengths of light, but which we perceive as the same color. Now, I think this relates to what I was trying to get at in my video earlier this week about biological autonomy, that it is not the external world in itself, the wavelength of light in itself, which determines the colors we perceive. It's the structure of our own sensory organs and the structure of the internal dynamics of our brain, the visual cortex, that give rise to color and that give rise to a world. It's not the environment in itself that determines our perception. Organisms are self-determining entities, meaning the way that my perceptual system has evolved, it gives rise to its own world space. And we may say, well, then how do I survive if my brain isn't, or my perceptual system isn't reflecting the world in itself? How do I survive? Well, through this process of evolution, as my organism became aware of more and more dimensions of, first it was tactile sensation, and then light sensitive pigments evolved into an eye, and the sense of taste and smell were closely related if we go back into evolutionary time, and all of these senses sort of sprouted out and gave me this world to live in. And at each step, of course, I was restricted by the environment's demand that I was able to take in energy and able to reproduce. But those are the only two stipulations. And so outside of those two stipulations, I can perceive, which doesn't mean, as it traditionally does, to receive the world as it already exists into my awareness. Perception in this new view is a creation of my organism, as long as that creation of a world space doesn't conflict with those two stipulations of being able to receive energy from the environment and to reproduce. I can live in whatever world I want. The environment can't stop me from doing that. So the organism then is self-determining. This doesn't get rid of determinism, because still we could say that the structure of my body is determined. But, this is why I think the whole framework of free will versus determinism is kind of outdated. If we're going to talk about the observations of modern science, we have to sort of leave these old philosophical dualisms behind. What we do know is that there is this irreducible first-person perspective and this similarly irreducible third-person perspective, and they both have to go together somehow. There's not two separate substances, a mental and a physical. There's one ongoing dynamic process, but somehow we can view that process from at least two different angles. We can view it from inside looking out, as an I, as a conscious awareness having experience, or we could view it from the outside in, as a scientist observing a phenomenon. I can open up someone else's skull, peer into their brain cavity, and manipulate their memories and sensory perceptions by stimulating the surface of their brain with an electrode. But at the same time, that brain stimulation is not the same as their first-person experience of it. And so if we're gonna say that everything is determined, if we're going to lop off one half of the dualism and say that free will and the mind as a separate substance is an illusion, how do we account for the fact that there are these two very different but equally real perspectives? I don't know. I'm just pointing out that, we can't ignore one and reduce it to the other. you know, we can say that free will is an illusion, that consciousness is an illusion. But nonetheless, it's a real illusion in the sense that we can't get rid of it. It's like when we watch a magician perform a trick. We don't know how he does the trick, and we may know that it is just a trick, but nonetheless, we are fooled by it. We don't know the mechanism behind the trick. And even if we did, when he performs the illusion, it appears to be magic. And in the case of consciousness, it's not the kind of trick where if we knew the mechanism, it would make the consciousness go away. The consciousness, the awareness of what it's like to be somebody, is irreducible. And granted, we may just have to come to the conclusion that science can only give us an impersonal truth, and that we will forever, as people, as entities with a personal perspective, we will forever remain cut off from that impersonal view of the scientific universe. But I, for one, I'm not at all satisfied with that kind of a solution to this problem, because I don't like dualism, and I think it fractures our worldview in a sense. One of the big problems I see with science is that it does distance itself from the personal perspective, and as a result of that, a lot of scientists don't want to be held accountable for the moral implications of their activity. And while certainly we don't want to limit scientific investigation unnecessarily, at the same time, there are plenty of ethical concerns, with regard to the kinds of technologies that can be developed and implemented, that, we all have to be worried about as people. And the more we agree to separate these two realms of impersonal scientific truth and personal sentimentalism and morality, the more trouble we're going to run into there. So, I don't know if I cleared up anything, but tried my best, so let me know if that helps any, Nick. Take it easy.